Hello and welcome to Synthesized Sunsets. Today we are joined by Daryl Gregory, who is a longtime sci-fi, fantasy, and comic book author. He has taught at many of the top speculative fiction workshops, including Viable Paradise, Claren West, and Locus. And his latest novel, When We Were Real, talks about a road trip set in a world turned to chaos after people learn that they do, in fact, live inside of a simulation. Daryl, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So we've both read your novel pretty recently.
Oh, that
So
was
we're
quick.
definitely
Thank you.
yeah. We'll be excited to talk about that. But actually, the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is the story I came across called "Free and Clear," which is I guess, a very graphic story about nasal congestion. And I felt very seen by this story. I must say. I remember when I was in middle school or something, and I was just in the throes of some horrible allergy season, and I was just, man, there's so many pop songs about love and like drugs and stuff, but nobody's ever written a song about sinus congestion. Like where's the media about sinus congestion for me? And so I was just wondering what sort of personal experience maybe inspired the story and what made you follow through with it also.
I love that this is the opener, this 20-year-old story about sinus congestion. Yeah, I tried to make the genre take off. I wanted a whole sinus, I wanted to be the romantasy of the time, and it just never took off. No, as you could probably tell from the story, it's about a guy who's so completely blocked up and allergic all the time and congested that he can't even hardly participate in his family. And he goes to this massage therapist who tries increasingly weirder and more extreme things to unblock him. And it's based on, yes, my own experience. For the longest time, I had the worst allergies, and I was huge sinus headaches. I just spent an enormous amount of time thinking about it, trying to take care of it. It was terrible. And then at a certain point, about 10 years after I wrote that story, something in my immune system died or changed, and I stopped having these huge reactions. I'm still allergic to cats and some things, but I'm not nearly as enfeebled as I was for years. Through my 20s, it was terrible. And so I wrote this story as a kind of fantasy, like, this is what I want to have happen. I want someone to tie me up in ropes and swing me across the room and then hit me right in the sinus cavity, right between my eyes, and have everything just sort of flood out. Because I heard this story from a friend of mine saying she went to this kinesiologist. It's like a chiropractor kind of thing, and this person manipulated her skull for like a half hour, and then took this rubber hammer and hit her forehead. And she said she just blew her nose for about 15 minutes. And I thought, that sounds like heaven. This is all I want, and I would risk dying if this could just happen to me. So that's how Free and Clear came about.
Yeah, I think something I realized is I guess sometimes I had similarly dramatic fantasies about stuff happening that would cure all my problems. And I'm just like, yeah, I guess there's only a limited number of fantasies that are possible relating to all of the things coming out of your sinuses. But I was just like, yeah, I feel like I've wanted something very similar to this to happen before. Every once in a while, I would just hear some sinus miracle cure story. It would make me so
Oh, I know.
envious. Like, I remember I remember I heard this one story of someone who did the thing where you sort of you go over like the Vicks boiling water and you
Oh,
just dump a towel over your head and just like, steams up the entire thing and then all of it just like comes out of your nose.
oh man, I
Um,
feel you, brother. I mean,
but
you
like,
and we may be the audience of two for this story. I may have found the only other reader of this story. It came out in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and Gordon Van Gelder, who was the editor at the time, said, "Well, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I want to buy this story." Like, thank you.
okay, so maybe I'll just transition into your talking about your novel. So, I guess for listeners who are not familiar, which I would assume is basically everyone, since the novel isn't actually out yet, could you give an elevator pitch for your novel?
Yeah, I think you did a good job, which is,
Yeah, When We're Real is basically I pitched it to my agent originally as The Matrix, but just the boring parts. It's about 7 years after we've all discovered that we're living in a simulation, and none of us got superpowers, none of us became Neo, and they're wondering now, well, what does this change? Like our internal feelings are still the same, but we know we're getting these daily proofs that we're living in a simulation. So does that change anything about how you go about your life? Like after the original freak out happens and all of society sort of freaks out, 7 years later, what do you do? And does it change your relationship to your friends and your family? There's religious people in the novel who are nuns and rabbis, and they're wondering, does this change our relationship to God? Like if we're living inside a simulation and the computer programmers are in charge, did God make the computer programmers? Am I worshiping the wrong person? Like how do I even deal with this existentially? And so I when I first was thinking about the novel, it was originally me and my friend of mine. We took this cross country trip, and I thought I'd like to write about this trip and about male friendship. But then I was like, well, I have all these different points of view I'd like to talk about. So it became a bus, and so there's a tour bus going across the country to visit the impossibles. And the impossibles are these things placed in the world by the programmers as sort of they defy physics, and they're sort of proofs that these are impossible things that could only live in a simulation, as sort of proofs that we're living there. And and I put lots of other people on the bus, like the nuns and the rabbi and a whole range of people, and I realized, oh, this is Canterbury Tales. This is a bunch of pilgrims going on a pilgrimage, and we're going to hear all of their stories, and they're going to all be wanting something from the end. In Canterbury Tales, they're trying to get to the pilgrimage site of Canterbury so they can be healed, but in in this story on the bus, everybody has a different goal for what they want. Yeah, so there's an influencer on the bus who's pregnant, and her main goal is to make herself and her baby so interesting that the computer programmers won't delete her. And I could talk about that concept that came from an economist that we can talk about. I know some of the questions you sent me ahead of time were talking about this idea of like who's an NPC, who's real, and that's one of the main sort of themes in the book. Is like everyone's trying to figure out what are the rules of the simulation.
Yeah, I think one thing about the book is that it reminded me of a lot of books that are not similar to each other. I don't know if you think that's a good thing or not, but one book that it reminded me of is Fall by Neil Stevenson. But specifically at the beginning of Fall, there's this scene where these people basically stage a hoax where all of Moab, Utah is just exploded by some like nuclear bomb. And they basically just cut off all information going in and out of Moab so that for a while there's no way to tell if Moab just actually was destroyed in a nuclear bomb because there's no way to get information in or out. But at the end, they're just like, oh yeah, this is like a hoax to do some other thing. What I really liked about the story is that it wasn't the case that people were just like, oh, I guess Moab wasn't destroyed. There was actually a very vocal faction of conspiracy theorists who were called Moab truthers, who were actually just like, no, actually, Moab was destroyed, and you guys are just being misled by the government to believe that this was a hoax and Moab wasn't actually destroyed. And despite lots of evidence to the contrary, there are still like a very vocal contingent of Moab truthers that recur throughout the novel. And I liked how you had a similar rendition of the world in When We Were Real, where it's not the case that everyone is just kind of like, okay, I guess we live in a simulation and just perceive rationally from that. There are some realists, and then there also are some people who have any number of strange beliefs. You have the groundhoggers, who believe that they live in the same day that's just being repeated over and over and over. And I thought it was nice that that was the attitude, which is I think more realistic to me, as opposed to just everyone just proceeding logically and rationally from like the absolute truth that yeah, everyone does live in a simulation now.
Well, right. I mean, well, there's two things I'd like to talk about. Yeah, one is the realist. So not to slam podcasters, but he's starting his own podcast and he actually can't even get it started yet. He just keeps recording episodes and trying to recruit his son to be part of the podcast. And who's like, no, it's all a hoax. The world is real. They're trying to fake us out. And of course, the funny thing for me is like right now, people who declare that we're living in a simulation are probably the conspiracy theorists. But I like the reverse, that somebody just refuses, even if there's huge evidence in front of them, he's just not going to believe it and explain how it's a hoax.
Yeah, one book this reminded me of was Hyperion. I don't know if you've read Hyperion.
Yeah, I love Hyperion.
Yeah. Definitely had a similar it's not as much contained in just specific short stories, but it is a similar like Canterbury Tales type inspired thing where you have these different people on a sort of pilgrimage and yeah, you have all their stories tying together.
Yeah, and I just don't kill all my people on a giant tree run by the Shrike, something at the end of time. Somebody said to me, well, didn't Dan Simmons already do Canterbury Tales? And I'm like, I am a firm believer that in science fiction, you can do something every 30 years and it's okay. Like somebody else could do Canterbury Tales.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just a really good structure.
And I thought of the second thing I wanted to say, which is there's a trope that happens a lot of times in science fiction movies, especially where, and a lot of times it's in horror movies, where there's one person who says, you know what's happening, and it's the one theory that's presented, and that turns out to be exactly what's happening. And so I like this idea that a bunch of people on a bus, and they would not have enough information to know exactly what is really happening and what they're supposed to be doing, which is the way I feel most of the time, which is we don't know a tremendous number of things, including why we are conscious. We don't know how consciousness even works. Nobody does, yet we still keep doing it. And so I was interested in this idea that people would just keep arguing their way through the book and no one would have the definitive answer.
Yeah, I think one thing that I think obviously really sets this book apart from Hyperion, and probably the one of the things I most noticed about the book is that I feel like it's really clear that you really like modern pop culture, like a lot. There's just so much pop culture inside of this novel. I feel like I didn't even catch all of it, and that was pretty cool. And I like the idea of there's a way to include pop culture that doesn't require that you understand what this particular pop culture reference is, but like if you do, then you're kind of just like, oh yeah. But I was wondering, like, how do you think that you strike that balance between, okay, yeah, this is like a good Easter egg, or just like, oh, maybe this is just too much of a reference to actually put in the final draft of the novel?
Jokes that you do for yourself that you're like, well, if somebody gets this, great, but probably most people won't. And so I do have this thing called the mom test that I had to develop for my mom, which was she's not a science fiction reader. So my mom test was that my mom has to understand who the characters are, what they want, and what they're trying to do. And she has to be able to understand that story and want to follow along. Yet, if she didn't get the Easter eggs and the extra references, she could still understand the story. And so that was always sort of my level, which is there's all this other stuff that I'm layering on that hopefully some percentage of people will get, or I'm just amusing myself. But the core story, everybody should be able to understand. And you're right, I do love pop culture. I mean, one thing I in my novels, I don't write stuff, a lot of stuff that happens in the future. If I do, it's very near future, or as I like to call it, weirdly inaccurate historical fiction in 5 years, because people look back and like, well, that didn't happen. I like being able to have people who are as aware as I am of what's true or not. So my people in the book have seen The Matrix. They've read stories, they've seen Blade Runner. There's a really stupid Blade Runner joke in the book that I did just for myself. And So yeah, I wanted people who would be able to use that language and argue the way me and my friends argue. So that's why it's in there.
Yeah. I feel like one thing I would say is changing a bit in the overall landscape of popular culture is I think there's actually more and more of a want for insularity. I think that within me and Gordon's cohort, I think a lot of the popular media is just built upon layers of like references to things that nobody outside of this ecosystem is ever going to understand, and that's in fact a feature and not a bug. But this is only possible because it's so much. It's so much. You can get so much more targeted media now. It's not the case that you have to be on the same page as everybody else, and I think that that's like. I'm curious how far this can continue. Could it get to the point where you almost need to get like a undergraduate degree level of knowledge and like some kind of fandom before consuming any of the cutting edge work? Or are people just kind of going to get sick of this fragmented pop cultural landscape and regress to more of a monoculture?
Right. So my son, comic book reviewer, he's in grad school right now, but he has a tremendously deep knowledge of any kind of mech anime or manga. He did a podcast called Mechadoo about nothing, where they would just watch anime and critique it at this really super granular level. And he knew every reference, like every time something shows up, like there's 20 years of Gundam stuff. And well, this is a reference to this thing happened in 1984 and this series that was running. And it's like, it's tremendously deep. So yeah, I think there is that kind of ability right now where thanks to the internet, you can find and go deep on stuff that you couldn't even get access to before. If it had to come through the television, that meant it was mass produced and mass distributed, but the internet makes all that stuff different. So, but the problem you have as an artist is where is your target? How universal do you want to make yourself? Do you want to make it so right now we can read Arthur Conan Doyle, we can read Jane Austen, we can go back and read Gilgamesh. So, translated Gilgamesh. I don't think you guys are up on your Sumerian, but anyways, you can go back and read this stuff, and those characters make sense to you still. They're human characters who love and fear and want to save their friends still. So that stuff is universal. And then the other stuff is sort of layered on. And it's every artist is trying to figure out what's their level. How much do I bring people in? How much is for this niche? And in science fiction and in comics and in manga, there are reading protocols, right? So there's an audience who comes in who understands how to read your art, how to understand your art. And they may understand, oh, your art is in response to these three other things. You're in a conversation with these previous things. So you, as an artist, you say, look, I'm commenting on this stuff. I'm adding to the conversation. And hopefully you have an audience who's participating in that conversation with you and they know what you're responding to. And then on the flip side of that, if somebody comes in and has no idea, they've never read Canterbury Tales, they've never read Hyperion, they've never read any science fiction, could they still find your way into the book and still find something to relate to? So every artist is trying to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even from like a consumer perspective, I often think about how would the way that I interact with media be different if I grew up in more of a monoculture and not such a hyper specialized media ecosystem. Because, for example, I would say that when I was, say, 10, I was really not into the like the music monoculture at all. It was barely even a monoculture then, but certainly much more so then than now. And I was just with like music on the radio and music that my parents listened to. It was kind of just like I could take it or leave it. But eventually, I was sort of convinced that I was sort of convinced to engage with music in a much more like specialized, insular way. And I basically learned like everything about like I suppose you could say like experimental bubblegum pop from like 2019 to like 2020. And this is something that I don't think I would have been able to do. I mean, obviously the music didn't exist, but I don't even think it would have been possible to participate in something so specific, like even 10 years earlier. But this really became a launch pad into me just having a greater appreciation for music in general. Now I kind of do like radio music and normal music that people listen to as a result of being immersed in like experimental bubblegum pop intensely for like 2 years. Um, but um, but yeah, speaking of just Gen Z topics, one thing that I really liked in your book is that I feel like it did a. I don't think this was like necessarily, well, maybe it was. Maybe this was the core focus of the novel. I think it did a good job of conveying the sort of digital panopticon feeling that I think that pretty much everyone in my generation has experienced to some degree. We live in a world where it's sort of assumed that everything you do in public is probably recorded in some way, or there's at least a pretty good chance of that happening. And as a result, your behavior is just different than it otherwise would be, and you just sort of have this expectation of being observed. Now, in the novel, because it's like a simulation that is known to be observed and surveilled by everyone, suddenly like everyone has that feeling. But I think that even in the world nowadays, people in my generation and also others already feel this on a smaller scale, this feeling of being surveilled and just how it changes their behavior in the real world. So I was wondering, to what extent do you feel surveilled? And also, do you think that it would change your behavior a lot if you felt like you were surveilled even more?
Well, I mean, as a parent, I was really thankful that the panopticon was not in effect when I was in college and not recording some of the events that happened. I do wonder, for younger folks, how is anyone ever going to be appointed to the Supreme Court where all of this stuff is online, and everything you've said has been recorded, even if you've changed your mind about it. But one thing I realized, and this is kind of a science fictional idea, which is once everything is recorded, you feel like nothing's recorded, because if it really is the water you're swimming in and breathing, then is there any such thing as not being observed, that you would even lose the ability to miss that feeling, because it's always the world you're in, you're always being observed. So then it's like the reality TV show effect, where people sometimes forget that they're being recorded and something real sort of happens on screen, and you see them lose track of their persona a little bit, and then they try to reassert their persona. If you ever watch these reality shows, you see sometimes, and it's so great because they love to find the cracks in the persona as well. The producers do, and the editors, so they're looking for those moments. So I don't know. I don't feel it as much because I'm of the generation who's restricting, who grew up, there was no internet when I was in high school. So I lack some basic gene that younger folks have. So I don't know. I don't feel it, but I could certainly see the effects on younger folks where they are always, there's always a level of presentation like you're thinking about. Well, this is my Instagram life. This is my real life. And then there's the backlash to it, which is a lot of Instagram influencers then come out and say, here's how terrible, here's what was really happening, and this is how terrible it was. And then you're like, is that itself a presentation? Complaining about how terrible it was? So yeah, you're through the looking glass at that point.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I've always been a little bit surprised when people are just when there's some like privacy scandal and people are just like, "Oh my gosh, like we were all being surveilled this entire time." And my reaction is sort of like, "We know. Like why are you surprised? We are always surveilled all the time." Um, but yeah, I can't say that I really can remember a time where I didn't feel like I was surveilled. So I think it's not necessarily like there's a certain mental state that I'm missing, but it's more just there's a certain way that I am, and maybe if I didn't feel that way, it'd be different. But who can say?
Well, one of the things I talk, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
One of the things I talk about in the book is that the generational gap of people who realize that we all found out we're living in a simulation 7 years ago. So your age when you found that out means you have way different reactions. And so the younger people in the novel are, well, duh. Of course we live in a simulation. Have you never played World of Warcraft or any kind of immersive thing where you're constantly online? Like it just makes total sense. Like they're blasé about the whole idea that of course we're living in a simulation. And so I think where you start is where you start is how you go forward. And it's hard to imagine it not being a certain way if you've grown up in a certain environment.
Yeah, the group of like the protags in the novel or whatever, which are just like this group of people who sort of believe they're protagonists of Keanu Reeves in The Matrix and everyone else is bots and stuff, but they're real people basically. Yeah, it was sort of unnerving reading because I was like, man, if this happened when I was 11, thinking back to my mind state as an 11-year-old or something, I don't know. I already had those thoughts reasonably often. Like, I might be the only person that exists or whatever. And then it's just, if it was confirmed I was living in a simulation and then 7 years passed and then I was 18, that might have been rough. So it is kind of scary to think about that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, even you grow up and you're like, well, wait a minute. I've been told there are all these people in other countries that I'll never get to. Are they really there? Is this just a media thing? Like, aren't they all NPCs and like we're the only real people? And that kind of solipsism can be really dangerous, I think, because if you can think we're real, other people are bots. They're less than human. I don't have to care beyond my small circle or even beyond myself. That just leads to all kinds of problems of empathy, a weird form of sort of media sociopathy. Things get very weird when you think other people aren't as human. They're NPCs. I'm a player character. I'm a protagonist.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even need a simulation for people to already feel this way. I think that on a lot of social media, people express this impulse. And I actually have a lot of sympathy for this impulse because I feel like it's almost a way to reclaim agency or individuality in a world where you just kind of can't be unique by the very nature of things. It used to be that if you sort of had like a certain set of interests and you were a certain way, then you kind of just like, wow, like I'm so special. I'm like the only one in my immediate geographical vicinity that has these attributes. But now you can just log onto the internet and find like 100 people that are just kind of doing the same thing, unless you're doing some really weird stuff. And so I think it's just harder and harder to feel like you are different or unique in any way. And I think on some level, thinking of other people as NPCs and yourself as the main character is a way to take some power back over this reality.
It's a real cutting edge thing that is possible now. Just the difference between me growing up without the internet and you being internet natives is that on one hand you're right. Like it's very hard to say I'm totally a freak. Like I'm the only person like this in 100 miles, and then you get online and there's an entire subgroup. There's they're online with you. There's everybody's had the same idea as you. But on the other hand, the sense of community can be hugely empowering. If you are growing up when I grew up, to grow up gay, you might feel like, am I the only person in my school who's gay? And nobody can come out. It's the 80s and things are weird. But today, if you could go online and find other people who are queer and other people who are trans, it's so you may not be as special, but you're also not alone.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really great for people who live in rural areas, especially. I think that one experience that my mom talks about is when she was in high school, she would do these extracurricular activities, and they'd be pretty good within their rural circuit of schools or whatever, like be pretty good at tennis, pretty good at music or math. But then when it came time to actually go to the state competition or whatever, they would just find all these crazies, like these urbanites who'd just been battling against each other for the past 5 years of their lives, who are just on steroids basically. And they would just be like, wow, what the frick? Like these people are sort of untouchable and unknowable. But I feel like that doesn't really happen anymore. I mean, it does if you're not plugged in, but I remember when I did extracurriculars in high school, the people who were in rural areas, sure, a lot of them weren't as competitive, but they definitely knew of the existence of these mythic, super extracurricular people, and they could sort of know what to expect beforehand. And I think that's been pretty good at both setting expectations and also connecting you to places where you can really kind of like go that extra mile where you otherwise might not really have anyone in your vicinity who could really push you.
This is one of the attractions of, for me, of being a writer, or for anyone who wants to be an artist, is that what you're really trading on is your own unique perspective. So every somebody will always have higher sales, somebody will always have more fans or something. There's all these metrics, or get a higher advance for a book. You can always feel bad about yourself as a writer at any point. There's plenty of opportunities to feel terrible about your life. Um, but your job is to sit down and say, okay, I'm not Dan Simmons, I'm not writing Hyperion, but what do I bring to the table that's just me? And even if it doesn't, even if it doesn't sell a million copies, if it's not, the biggest romantasy that's happening right now, like, okay, so I still got to do something that was unique to me, um, that no one else can do. Like, I'm in the Daryl Gregory business. The rule when you're a writer is keep your eyes on your own page, because comparison is the thief of joy. Constantly comparing yourself to someone else and what prizes they're getting, it just it robs joy of your life out of your life.
Yeah, I think something that made writing seem more compelling to me is that when I was younger, I pretty much just saw writing as a craft thing. There is sort of just a way in which you shape your sentences and ideas you can have, and the writing just kind of is downstream of the skill that you have in that. But I think more recently, I've realized the extent to which your writing is also a reflection of the shape of your thoughts, which is unique to you. And even if you don't really hone your craft at all, there is still a unique way that your writing will come out just because everyone thinks so differently. And this in itself is just sort of something you can bring to the table, irrespective of any ability of craft that you have. I don't have a good way to transition into this, but
No, right.
I think one thing I really want to ask you about is the world of comics and superheroes, because unlike every prior guest on this podcast, you have some experience in the world of comics. I saw that you wrote for Green Lantern and Planet of the Apes. Is that right?
Green Hornet.
Oh, Green Hornet. All right, sorry, my mistake.
Yeah, Green Hornet, more obscure than Green Lantern.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a couple things I'm interested in. One of them is how close together would you say that the world of science fiction prose and science fiction comics are in publishing and also in the people that participate in them? And also, what has it been like seeing comics go from this thing that's very niche and nerdy into kind of just like the most valuable entertainment properties on the whole planet? Like that must be pretty crazy.
Your first question, how close are science fiction, let's say, publishing and prose publishing and comics? They're worlds apart, really. I mean, there's people who do both, and I've done both. I'm mostly a prose person. I consider myself a dabbler in comics. I did it for a few years, but I haven't worked in a long time now. I'm concentrating on prose. But they operate in really different ways with different publishing models, down to the contracts, down to your ways of working. They're really different. One thing I love about prose publishing is that it's more of a level playing field. You're submitting fiction to the magazines, and they'll take anybody if the story's good enough. There are fewer ways to get into comics. I only got in because a friend of mine who did comics said, you should give this Daryl guy a chance. And then I started writing comics. And I was thrilled because I grew up reading comics, and I just loved the medium, and I wanted to learn how to do it. But they're really operating completely different ways. The joke in comics is that every time somebody gets into the field, they shut that door behind them, and you've got to find a new way into the field. the best advice for getting into comics is to make your own comics online. The hard part of that is if you're a writer and not an artist, is finding an artist. Artists have to invest a huge amount of time to make something compared to what a writer can do. I would feel guilty. So I used to work with a guy, Carlos Magno, fantastic artist. I worked with him on Planet of the Apes. And one time I wrote this thing that took me 15 minutes to write. And it was basically like, here's a 2-page spread of this massive battle between these two armies. And he had to work on that thing for a week. And it was 4 sentences for me. And I'm like, just go to town, Carlos.
Yeah.
I used to read a lot of webcomics, and webcomics were sort of a sad medium to follow, I would say, like in the early 2010s, because usually what would happen is that the artist would start out, it was usually the same person actually would write and draw the art. And they would usually just come out like super bright and optimistic about their future of the comic, and the first few issues would come up and they're just rolling. But then eventually, like, it would just slowly start to just like and like they would leave increasingly like ominous author notes at the bottom of each page, just like, yeah, sorry guys, my stylus broke, so I don't know when the next page is gonna be up. And 1 week later, it's like, yeah, so I broke my wrist and I need to get some reconstructive surgery, so I don't think the chapter's gonna be out today. And they're like, yeah, sorry, I don't really have a job anymore. So like sometimes you just watch someone, you would witness someone's entire downhill slide because they could not sustain this hobby of theirs. And I think it was especially sad when you could see it come through in the comic. I remember there was this one comic where like they're just like, hey guys, I'm really excited to announce that we got enough money on Patreon to hire a colorist, because it was a black and white comic for the longest time. And that was definitely a point against it. It was less cool than the other webcomics that had colors. And so when it got colors, I'm like, oh my gosh, this comic's so much cooler because it has colors. And then a month later, they're just, yeah, sorry guys, we didn't reach our stretch goal, so there's just like no more color. It just goes back to being black and white. And I'm just like, shit. Yeah, I don't know. So like you got a lot of situations like that were kind of sad to see, because these artists just really had no way of financially supporting themselves.
Right. It's just very difficult to artists, and it's very difficult to do your own comics because the artists need to be paid. It's just like a tremendous amount of time and money.
Yeah, something I'm kind of curious about just in terms of the economics of comics nowadays, because it feels like a lot of the eventual consumers of comics are, I don't know, if you're someone who like makes a comic and then it eventually gets like picked up to be a MCU show on Disney Plus or something, but not that many people actually read the comic, but then a lot of people watch the show. Do you know if that ends up being pretty successful for the artist and writer of the actual comic, or do they just see none of that money or anything?
No, not unless they own it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pretty famous in comics that some of the biggest storylines in the movies were created by writers and artists, and they got bupkis for creating, like the resurrection of Bucky in in Winter Soldier and Captain America Winter Soldier. The writer who created that storyline has been pretty clear that he got basically nothing for that. I think he said he made more as a background actor, like they had him show up one day than Marvel actually paid him. I shouldn't say that until I check my quotes, but no, if you don't own it, that's the thing about comics is almost all of those DC Marvel comics is work for hire, which means you don't own it. You don't get paid anymore if it becomes huge. You don't get paid if it becomes a movie. They may thank you in the credits, but that's about it. So if you own something, though, Robert Kirkman's Invincible, then yeah, that's your property and you will own that and you will sell those rights. For my novels, I own the media rights and I license them. They get optioned and they try to make them into TV shows, and then they try to develop them for several years, and then nothing happens, and then they sell it to somebody else. So it's very hard to get anything made, but I own all those rights. And so I can make more from selling options than I can make from the novel itself. So it's a very weird kind of environment. Yeah. So those people, to answer your question, no, most of them are not getting paid.
That's kind of what I figured.
Do you think that the world needs more superhero stories?
No. No, they don't. But we don't need anything. I mean, we don't need more vampire stories. We don't need more werewolves. We don't need any science fiction. The question you have to ask yourself is, do I have something I want to say that I want to bring to the table that hopefully other people will want to read? But nobody needs that, right? I mean, no one says we can't survive unless we have dragon erotica. We need way more than we have now. I only say that because
I
a
don't
friend
know.
of
I
mine
feel like surely someone thinks this.
No, your job as a writer, your job as an artist is to not chase the market, because by the time you write something and sell it and it gets published, that's 3 years down the road. You don't know what's going to be hot in 3 years. So yeah, the best you can do is try to write what you is closest in your heart.
I think it's interesting just how postmodern all of superhero fiction has become, because I get the sense that it's sort of because a lot of superhero stuff followed the same formula, but it's just you can't keep doing that forever. You know, it needs to evolve. And I think that superhero fiction has gone through many stages of just like postmoderning itself even harder, with Cross the Spider-Verse being like the most, where you actually have a blending of like live action and animation and like, Legos, and it all just gets very crazy. Yeah, that happened. Yeah, like it gets very crazy. And I'm sort of wondering, I feel like most of the popular superhero stuff now is very post superhero. You have The Boys, for example, or like Watchmen, which is sort of like challenging the very core of like the genre itself. And I'm wondering how long can that continue, and what's sort of after that? Do you think that superhero fiction will just kind of go back to being less meta and crazy, or do you think there's maybe like some future evolution in that direction that
Well,
superhero fiction could go in?
I think what you're already seeing in superhero movies, at least, is, well, first of all, once you've tasted irony, you can't get that taste out of your mouth.
Yeah, I kind of feel like even if superhero media was to return back to being more straightforward, it's not, it can't be back because the landscape is just ironic and meta now. On some level, it has to be referential in the way that the original property was not. I think there's no way of escaping that. Even if it's not, I think there's still going to be people who interpret that way, because that's just like kind of how things are.
Right.
But I am curious to see whether we're headed in more straightforward direction or an even crazier direction. And I could actually just I could see both possibilities. I was yeah, Gordon, do you think it's gonna swing back around?
I think to some extent, I think it might a bit, but I also just think it'll be a lot less popular than it has been. I think there was kind of a thing where, specifically with the popularity of the MCU stuff, where you could really ride this tide of, okay, that was super popular, and then because it was like such this main pop culture thing, you could be really successful doing more ironic things relating to it. But at a certain point, as the original popular thing fades from the culture's memory or whatever, then you're gonna stop succeeding at doing that, and you can like maybe try to do more straight up sincere things, but it's probably not going to be as effective as in the past. So I would guess superhero stuff is going to see a decent downturn over the next 10 years or so, if I were to guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that feels reasonable to me. And people have also kind of like seen not maybe not seen it all, but seen a lot. I think, Daryl, have you read Worm? Have you heard of Worm before?
No, I didn't. I haven't been able to set 10 years aside to read the million plus words of Worm. My son, who consumes all media, let me know about it and has read some of it. But it is an interesting kind of thing that could have only existed once you had the internet, where people could tune in and just keep coming back, and the story keeps growing and growing and growing beyond the bounds of any reasonable way of publishing it. I understand that they're trying to edit down to make it actually into something that you could publish into volumes, but it's just too many words right now.
Yeah, I mean they could definitely edit Worm down. I'm sorry. I mean I am a big Worm fan, but some parts of it is just like okay. But I think Worm really did that for me. I think that I read Worm kind of around the time of peak MCU mania, and I think that those two things ending, me reading Worm and then also me seeing Avengers Endgame or whatever, taken together, I was just kind of like, what now? I mean, how is it ever, how is anything ever going to compare? And I think, especially with Worm, to see all of these crazy, interesting ways that superpowers are used and how it interacts with people's normal lives. I think there was just a pretty long time where whenever I saw a superhero show or book or whatever, I was just kind of like, yeah, it's not Worm. Or like, yeah, it's not like Avengers Infinity War. And it was just sort of, it's kind of when maybe, I guess there's a lot of people that don't feel this way, but I remember when I saw the Chicago Blackhawks win their third championship in 6 years or whatever, I was sort of just like lost a lot of my motivation to keep watching because I was just where does it go from here? It's already I feel like the joy and the romance of following a sports team is that like you're just hoping for that moment when they win, but they like kind of never do. And but once that happens several times, I feel like I'm just like, gosh,
Oh,
I feel like they just
you're picking the wrong team. This is why you picked the Cubs, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
One
no,
time.
exactly. Like I really
we get one time, that's it. Wait another 200 fucking years, man.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what you just have to wait for. That teaches you, being a Cubs fans teaches you how the world works. Look, you have to show up to your job, you have to do your job, even though you suck, even though other people are yelling mean things at you. You just show up, you do your job day after day, and you'll be mathematically eliminated by August. That's what life is like.
Yeah, the idea of being a Lakers fan or like a Patriots fan is like a bit gross to me. I think that I would much sooner relate to the experience of being like a Lions fan. Kind of like makes more sense to me, I guess. I sort of just I don't know. I think that there's something cooler about it. I feel much more emotional resonance when it comes to people that just never quite get there. I feel like once you've done it a few times, it's not. There's no way it can be the same.
Right? No, I'm not gonna. I wouldn't trade those years where the Bulls were on top of the world, but that's over now.
It's crazy how in Chicago, like on just normal, my dad would always have sports talk radio on like every morning on the weekends, and they would always talk about these old Chicago sports teams like they had just won, like not too long ago. Like I would just be hearing them like talking with these players, and like, wait, this is the '85 Bears, right? Not like the current Bears. And they're just like, yeah, Ditka, blah, blah, blah. And like, you just see these guys like on TV like all the time. And then like I feel like my mom would always get really annoyed by this. It was 30 years ago. Just come on. But I think there is something charming about it. I wonder do you feel like there's more nostalgia in Chicago sports than like other cities?
Sure, the Bears. That's the thing that we got going for us. Maybe I don't know. Probably every city is like that, but I feel like as a Chicagoan that we have a special relationship to nostalgia. What with the Cubs and the Bulls and the Blackhawks and the Bears, it's like, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like LA, for example, LA sports teams are just all so good. Like it just can't be the same. Like the Dodgers, the Lakers, they're just always winning. It's okay. You moved to LA and then became a fan of the LA team. Like sure, I guess you live there, but it's not romantic at all.
I agree. It doesn't teach you how to be a better person to be a fan of a winning team like that.
As a final question, I was wondering what your favorite pizza place in Chicago is.
Like my sister still lives in Chicago, so I go visit. Lou Malnati's for deep dish. But what I try to preach around here is like, no, you have to try Chicago tavern style pizza, the super cracker crust, square cut, party cut pizza. Oh, I love it. So right, I live in West Seattle, and there's a place near me called West of Chicago where they do legitimate Chicago deep dish and legitimate Chicago tavern style pizza, and it's just so great. He even does Italian beef. I have to explain to people what an Italian beef is, which I think is a crime against nature. That people, it's not the national sandwich. Oh my freaking god! I tell people that in Chicago, you can get a thing called a combo where you put the Italian sausage in the bun, and then you put the beef on top, and then you dip the whole
It's
thing.
great.
Like in Chicago, meat is a condiment.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I feel like that was one of the biggest cultural shocks that I had moving to Seattle is that there's just so much less meat in general in a lot of ways. Yeah. But yeah, so I think this is a pretty good time to wrap things up. So I guess as a final note, is there anything you would like to plug? And is there any short story recommendation that you would like to make?
Oh, well, the big plug is for When We Were Real will be out April 1st. No Foolin' 2025. It'll be probably very soon by the time this podcast comes out. And yeah, if you want to read something of mine online, there's a wacky kind of science fiction farce called I'm Not Disappointed, Just Mad, aka The Heaviest Couch in the Known Universe. And that's up on reactormag.com. You can go read that now. That was out this past fall. And stories will keep coming out in anthologies that I've written that they haven't announced the anthology yet, but those will be coming out down the road. So yeah, so please, I wish I had t-shirts or merch to sell you, but I don't.
All right, Daryl, thanks so much for coming on the show, and we will see you all next week.
Welcome back. So, any thoughts on the episode, Kevin?
Yeah, I think the episode was pretty good. It might not have been as consumable as some of our other episodes. Not as many takes were being had and such, but it was definitely a pretty good vibe. Especially at the beginning, it was really great to be able to talk about Illinois stuff a little bit before the episode started with Daryl, and then also talk about that really niche story about a really niche experience. But yeah, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it was definitely a fun convo. And yeah, I would say I didn't talk all that much in the episode, a fair amount. I didn't have too many takes on, but it was still fun to listen to. And it was great specifically to talk about the story. I really liked the book quite a bit, and it's fun to get to talk to him about that. And in line with that, sort of, with kind of the main theme of the book being about the world being a simulation, I was wondering if you had, any thoughts on how likely it is that you think, like, do you think it's a legitimate possibility that the world's a simulation? And if so, if you learn that information, would you act a lot differently?
I think I would be quite happy to learn that we live in a simulation, honestly, because I feel like the case for free will in our current world is honestly not all that strong. I think there's certainly a case to be made for indeterminism with like quantum uncertainty and such, but in terms of there being a real mechanism by which some sole agent can direct our brain and body to do things, I think you kind of have to buy into at least a little bit of dualism or theism to get that to work. So I think that would be nice in that it would give me more confidence that we actually have free will, because I feel like if I learned that I did not have free will, I would be very sad, and I would probably try to erase this fact from my memory and not give myself any means of coming across it again. But I don't really think it would change my day to day that much, although I could definitely be impressed upon to change my behavior. I think that even seeing that character from the novel, I don't remember exactly what her name was, but the Instagram influencer who was trying to act very protagonisty so that she wasn't somehow deleted. That didn't really occur to me, but I could probably be convinced to act like that. After having seen her do that, I'm just like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. So I think I would really be susceptible to being swayed by my peer group, as I am in many other areas of life.
I guess I don't know if I would necessarily agree that it supports free will too much, or to some extent, maybe I'm just too attached to kind of my sense of free will and consciousness are too bound together to really view myself in any other way. So I think even if I think I believe I have free will in a similar, like, I'm not a religious person, but I believe I have free will in a similar way, in more of a faith way than a scientific way. It's less of a analyzing the evidence type belief and being, well, it's probably true, and more of kind of, this is true, and then from there I'm gonna assume other things. It's kind of more of an axiomatic belief, and as a result, it's hard for things to mess with that for me. But I think if anything, learning I was in a simulation would be a bit of a shock to that, would make me less confident on things, especially if it was specifically the type of simulation where, as in the book, you kind of have potentially infinite layers going up and down. Because that something about that really, really makes me uncomfortable. I don't know. I don't want to be uh uncountably layers deep. I'm down to be on the second layer, but there's something a bit wrong with that. I don't know if you would agree.
Yeah, I mean, that seems kind of fucked, I guess. One thing that I take heart in is that even if your life is sort of like meaningless in the grand scheme of things, just by the butterfly effect, you will just have these repercussions on the universe that will ripple out like into eternity basically. And these are ripples that only you the individual agent can create, because I mean, there can't be two people in one place at the same time. Except if you're part of a tower of an uncountably infinite number of Earths, then actually there can be, and you could just not be unique an individual agent at all. And so I think that would be kind of a bummer. I wouldn't get to like a special snowflake anymore.
Yeah, it sucks. I don't know. Yeah, so a story that talks about this particular concept that I was thinking of when reading the book is a story by Quantum, which I believe you've read as well, called I Don't Know, Timmy, Being God is a Big Responsibility. And in this story, you basically just have some people in an apartment who are kind of just coding up this simulation and realize that they kind of cook too hard and just simulate the whole world, and then realize that those people are doing the same thing because they're just simulating the world as it is just in this laptop, and it just goes all the way down, and it also goes all the way up. So I think they spawn in an object into their room or something by writing a command into the computer simulation. And when they spawn the object into the room in the one they're simulating, one spawns into their room as well, which means like they're not on the top level. Yeah, and sort of the end of the story is, he's gonna go turn off the computer, and he's like, oh, never mind, we can't do that. Yeah, and yeah, I thought it was quite a depressing story, to be honest. And yeah, I would not vibe with being in it. Not that I think it's like really plausible that exactly like that is possible. Like you definitely can't perfectly simulate the universe within a laptop.
I wouldn't say that I don't really remember the headspace I was in. I don't remember finding the story particularly depressing. I feel like I was kind of just like, oh, it's really cool when they see the thing spawn, because they're just like, oh shit, we're not on the top level, but we don't know anything about the nature of reality. Um, I think one thing that's worth considering is that even though obviously the universe directly above them and directly below them are quite similar, they may diverge as you get out towards the poles. I think there is reason to believe that like the further away you get from the host universe, the more, or the source universe, the more deviations that there are. So even though they were able to spawn the thing, I don't necessarily know that that suggests that everyone spawned the thing. But they would at least have to like. But I really like moments like that in a story where you learn that your model of reality has to be adjusted in this certain way, but then you don't really know much beyond that.
Yeah. The thing that I find Timmy's story really hit at for me, that I find disconcerting, is basically like, if you take the story at face value, everyone in the story has only existed for, was created at the start of the story, basically. And they have memories and whatnot, but they never existed for that portion of time, because they can't have, right? Because the simulation didn't exist, and as a result, I guess it's just scary to think about that it's technically possible that, yeah, your past self doesn't exist and your memories and whatnot are just kind of implanted there. And yeah, I don't considering that as a possibility because it puts me in a bad headspace.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that angle. That is kind of creepy. I know, like, the scene that really got me with that is like there's this one scene in Ghost in the Shell. Have you seen Ghost in the Shell?
I haven't actually, which is really wild to be honest. Out
There's
of
this
character for me to have not seen it.
there's just like this really bad scene that's honestly sort of traumatic where this guy realizes that this thing is true about himself, like beyond a doubt, and he's just like very, very distressed. It's like a pretty fucked up scene. Like he realizes that he just didn't exist past a certain point. But yeah, I mean it's kind of yuck. I mean, shifting gears a little bit, one thing that I find really interesting is in the TV show Invincible, there's like this one character called the Mauler, or I guess the Maulers, who are basically these genius monster scientists. And when their distinctive powers that they can make clones of themselves, but critically they have to make it so that neither of them can know who the original Mauler is, because if they do, it creates this like toxic power dynamic where one of them's like, well, I'm the original. And so they have to make sure that like all the conditions are perfectly a certain way, and they just like wake up in one, and both of them is just completely convinced that they're the other one. But there's this one part in the show where one of them is sort of scarred and fucked up, and so they actually know beyond a doubt that they are the original one. Um, and you will soon see why they decide to create this arrangement in the first place.
Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic. I remember that dynamic came up in Mother of Learning as well.
Oh
There's like
yeah,
with
yeah.
the creating the simulacrums, and yeah, one of the characters is just like who's like kind of a evil character. They just like can't create simulacrums because they don't, uh, you know, they'll they won't be able to trust themselves to do that because they're too power hungry into something. And I think it's kind of an interesting concept in fantasy because it's something like creating clones of yourself is something that can give you a lot of power and whatnot, and is very useful if you're like an ambitious person or whatnot. It's just like you have more clones of yourself, you can do more stuff. But it's like specifically something which is just like way more OP if you're like very selfless and generally a good person, empathetic and whatnot. Because yeah, if you're just very self-serving and whatnot, a clone of you is not gonna just like act in your best interest. And that's just like not the case of almost any I don't know, just like most forms of power or whatnot, I feel like, which I think is kind of cool. It can become a really interesting plot device as a result.
Yeah, that was a really cool thing to be revealed in that story. Like, why can't certain people? Because I remember that was like a lingering question in the story is like, why can some people create simulacra and not others? And it's just, oh yeah, you have to be a sort of all right person. But from my perspective, I feel like you don't even have to be a particularly selfish person to want to seize control from the original, especially if they can kind of discard you at any time. Like, I wouldn't really hold it against anyone if they, I guess, wrested control from from their original as a
Oh
simulacra.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if I was in this position, I would definitely try to do more of like a whatever the character Mahler from Invincible you were saying,
Oh
like
yeah,
some sort of yeah, I don't know, wipe of who the real one is, or have some sort of I don't know, decide on some sort of indentured servitude for myself or something. Like, okay, yeah, I might be down to agree to like working for myself for some portion of time, but then being free, guaranteed. There is an extent to which like I think you can make deals with yourself in this situation in a way you wouldn't be able to with an actual person, because you can kind of fully trust yourself in some ways, like you know what the other one's thinking, kind of.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There would be some relief in that to, like, I don't know, submit yourself to someone who may not have your best interests at heart necessarily, but at least have very, very similar interests at heart, and you know they're not going to do you wrong in the way that you would, at least not at the start of the arrangement. I think there would be
Yeah.
some comfort there. But I would probably be pretty grateful, honestly, like
Mm.
to be brought into existence.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wouldn't even exist in the counterfactual.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have the humility necessary to actually believe I'm not the original. I think I would just be like, and they tricked me and stole it from me. I because it's just like if I have like just all my same memories and experiences and whatnot, sure I can know like scientifically, factually, I was born yesterday, but I don't know if I would be able to internalize that.
Probably healthy.
What, on my part?
Yeah.
I don't know about that. Yeah, so changing topics, you just wrote this article on the short story where Oaken Hearts Do Gather. And yeah, I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
So this article is a little bit of a hit piece. I didn't go super hard into the story, but I remember reading the story for the first time. I was very excited to read it, and after reading the story, I was kind of just like, "Hmm." It's not often for me that I read a story and I'm like, "Okay, these are some things that I think are objectively wrong about this story." Usually I don't have enough confidence in like my personal taste to say things like that. I think usually I just chalk it up to like aesthetic preferences and stuff like that. Like, oh, okay, that wasn't really my thing. But in this case, I was just like, huh, there are these certain things that I think really should have been done differently, even though there were these other things that I may have liked about it. And I've been sitting on these thoughts for a long time, and so they're finally out to all of you. But in summary, this story, Where Oaken Hearts Do Gather, is about a mysterious English folk ballad, and it's about this quest for truth that a bunch of these random people on the internet engage in while they're analyzing the lyrics. They're trying to get to the bottom of what this song even means, and also what happened to this documentarian when he went to the site to figure out what the heck was going on with this song. And the author actually records the song, which she came up with, that you can listen to. And it's presented almost like a genius.com lyrics explainer page. So you have the song lyrics, and then it's like annotated with all these kinds of random footnotes and comments and such. And I really like this sort of experimental web fiction format. I've seen it done a few different times, but in this particular case, it just really didn't feel like the internet to me. It didn't really feel plausibly like this was an actual interaction that was actually taking place on the internet, as opposed to just this cool um, stylistic trick that the author wanted to use to tell an interesting story. So this is basically what the piece is about, and I also spend a little bit of time speculating about what things could have been instead. But it seems to me that Gordon, you actually liked the story a lot less than me. I don't think I really liked the story all that much, but I think there were definitely some redeeming qualities about it. But what were your thoughts on the story?
Yeah, I kind of hated the story. Maybe hate's too strong a word, but yeah, I didn't like it. As you said, just the characters in this story do not feel like distinct people. They because they're just all talk in sort of the same style on like internet forum basically, and they're not talking as if they're on an internet forum, and it's just I don't know. I couldn't really suspend disbelief. And this is just like very rare for me. Because I don't know, I read like a lot of shitty web fiction, and it's generally not hard for me to just be like, well, it's like whatever, it's fiction, whatever can happen. But something about the way was set up, I was just like, okay, these people are not just all going about their lives very dedicated to this figuring out what's up with the lyrics of this one song and all, kind of like doing the same sorts of stuff, talking to each other and whatnot. And yeah, as a result, it just really didn't hit for me. I thought like the premise of the format was kind of cool, but I thought it actually like made my enjoyment decrease a lot. Like I think well, I don't know if I would have liked the story because I didn't find the song all that interesting. But I think I could have at least thought it was like pretty decent if it was just sort of one person's kind of essay or something like about the song. If the frame story was just someone's thesis or something analyzing the song "Where Oaken Hearts Do Gather," I think that would have been a much more interesting setup because, uh, yeah, like all the characters, the different users' comments and stuff, just it just felt like one person's thoughts, and then like, oh, okay, we're gonna have this person say this, then this person say this, then this person say this, and like split it up. But they didn't, yeah, they didn't really feel like distinct characters.
Well, I mean, yeah, going to bat for the story a little bit. I did feel like they had distinct personalities. I think that really what hurt it was that this is not how distinct personalities would translate to the internet. I think if you were to kind of just recast all these comments as conversation things that were said to each other in like a library or something, they kind of feel more distinct. I think that Dynamum was sort of this more like consensus builder type, like let's all get along, isn't it just grand that we're all hanging out type of person. Whereas I don't remember what the initial woman was called, but like there was that one woman who like established a lot of the history, but who had a little bit more of like an autistic vibe to me, but just like not really as interested in like the investigative juicy stuff. And then there was the guy who actually went out to make to like go look for the documentarian. I feel like they all kind of felt distinct to me. But you're right in that they definitely wrote in the same style by internet standards, and I think that really kind of stretched believability. But again, I think that if you were to just translate those things into like a conversation in a room or something where they're all just conspiracy theory boarding something up and saying these stats of conversation to each other, I don't think it would have felt like weak characterization. At least not for me personally.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe not for me. It's sort of hard to tell because once I stopped kind of like believing in the setup, once I stop caring about the characters, I'm like gonna notice less things. But um, so maybe it might be like a bad reinforcing loop where it's just like I stopped noticing the proper differences in characterizations once I stopped really thinking of them as distinct characters. But yeah, I don't know. At the very least, I did kind of stop thinking about them as distinct characters. I mean, there's like the one person who actually like went to do stuff. Um, and I was kind of thinking about them as like, yeah, maybe. I was thinking about them as like the main character sort of in my head, but it felt like the rest of everyone kind of could have just been that person doing internet research or whatnot, and then doing their stuff interacting with the real world. Um, but yeah. Um, yeah, and then also, as you say in the article, yeah, it could have cooked so much harder with just like having links to stuff and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it really bugged me that even of the stuff that did exist, I don't know, when you have like the full lyrics thing that's underlined, can't you have it like jump down to the lyrics or something? And like the thing that annoyed me the most, obviously, was these random footnotes that didn't even click. I just like went to the HTML. I'm like, yep, somebody fucked up. Like that's not how you code that. I was just like, come on, you're not even gonna test to see if all these footnotes work. So yeah, but I mean, again, these editors have a tough job, right? They have to sift through so much literature, and if you're not used to editing that kind of story, then you're not gonna like look for that kind of stuff. And I think that it's really, I place the blame for this story more at the feet of a genre not knowing how to handle digital fiction, as opposed to the author herself, who certainly could have done a better job with some things. But I think that in a genre where that sort of style is more prevalent, she would have been pushed to go beyond. Like I think if the author had read Quantum or like even The Wandering Inn, it would have created that creative inspiration. But her background's mostly in music, and I think that showed. Like,
Oh.
I think that there were definitely some elements that felt like I certainly believed that she was a musician, I guess, if that makes
Yeah, that's
sense.
true.
Which she is.
Yeah, and the lyrics themselves were pretty cool, I thought. And it did. The fact that it was some sort of folk ballad was at least somewhat believable. Like there are weird folk ballads and stuff. Yeah, I listened to it. I wasn't actually that big a fan of the recording itself, but yeah, I thought the lyrics were pretty cool. I do feel like my reaction to this story though is kind of part of the reason. Like it's kind of a cancerous reaction in that my type of response is sort of why I feel like science fiction hasn't advanced more in this space, because it's really easy to shoot down stories that like like they don't really capture the essence of the internet or whatever. It's just like not believable, and it makes it harder to feel like contrite. Like, yeah, I did like this story less than I would have if it was just like a more boring text-based story. And that kind of sucks. And that's probably like a lot of people's opinion for a lot of stories. And as a result, you don't get people trying to cook in this direction. So yeah, well, I do not particularly like this story. I do like that it exists. And I also like that other people like it. It's because I want to see more stories in this direction, at least, if not exactly like this. And I think it's good if there is more demand for this type of thing, or yeah, people trying to think up new things in terms of structure and stuff. And it's difficult when it's just like when you try to do something new in this direction. I think it's so easy for the cons to outweigh the pros.
Yeah, at the very least, the fact that it won these awards was kind of a white pill in terms of mainstream sci-fi being ready for these stories. Because before the story came out, I feel like you could just be like, well, why would sci-fi go in this direction? Because, I mean, are those people even going to like these things? But the fact that it was able to sweep these popular awards just shows that, oh, no, really mainstream sci-fi audiences are ready. And if only they knew what else was possible, we could see a real paradigm shift.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. To finish off, Kevin, did you have any recommendations?
Yeah, so this story was something I read a little bit ago, but it's actually a story that's published here on Substack. It's called Standard Candles by Yoon-Ha Lee, and it was published by the Substack fiction newsletter, the Sunday Morning Transport. So I don't really want to describe the story that much in detail because I don't want to spoil anything, but I would say it's quite similar to The Last Question by Isaac Asimov, and having this really big picture look at the universe in a way that is very, I don't know, poetic and existential. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.